Welcome to the Hey There Thrivival podcast. I'm your host, Emily Haigh, and on this podcast, we talk everything extreme parenthood. We've got inspiring parent stories and top global experts on all things twins and multiples you're going to want to tune in for. Now, what happens when a professional ballerina swaps her point shoes for playmats and then laces them back up after 3 children, including twins? Well, if you're a new parent or a parent of multiples or just a lover of elite performance, then today's guest, Dana Stephensen, will dish up all of that and so much more. This is a really relatable story. It talks about her professional career as a ballerina, navigating identity change into motherhood, becoming a twin mum, then working through postnatal depression, and then a reflection on what's next. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And it would also be great if you could please give us a rating so the algorithm gets us to reach more parents just like you to thrive rather than just survive. Okay, let's jump in. Dana, welcome to the Hey There Thrivival podcast. It's so great to have you joining us today. Could you give the audience an overview as to who you are and what you do?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dana Stephensen and I am a mother of 3 beautiful kids. I have a almost 10-year-old son, Jasper, and twin girls who have recently turned 5. I was a professional ballerina with the Australian Ballet for 19 years and I retired from the stage 2 years ago. So since then I've been full-time mum and adjusting to post-retirement life, which is a pretty massive transition. So there's been lots going on in the last few years, especially.
I bet. Well, a lot to get into, Dana. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about your journey today. Let's start with little Dana. So there's not a lot of people out there who go from doing ballet or whatever hobby it is that they do when they're younger to making it a professional career. So I'd love to hear a bit about who you were and how you started to make, I guess, that transition.
Yes, so spot on. It was really a very natural progression that ballet as my hobby as a 3-year-old when I started, and then obviously I danced throughout my childhood and into teenagehood where I chose to follow it more particularly and with a lot more determination and dedication. And then it became my career, and it's only since I've retired actually that I can really look back and see how very unique it is for your childhood hobby, your childhood dream to come true as your career and to be able to follow that through for so many years. So it is a really unique gift actually that really I started dancing and I sort of never stopped. And for me, it feels like one big chapter actually, rather than sort of broken into when I was a little girl. And then when I got more serious, it was really just one big chapter full of little chapters with ballet at the center of my life. So I was a very enthusiastic, energetic 3-year-old. I started dance lessons after sitting at the back of my sister's dance lessons. I was probably a bit more confident than her. You kind of couldn't stop me dancing, and that kind of just went through my childhood. And yes, dance was central to my life. It was part of my social life. I danced 6 days a week from a young age, and it was just something I felt so happy to do. It felt very natural and it felt exactly how I wanted to express myself. And then that continued obviously into my long career that I just was able to develop that further.
Fantastic. And was there a particular dancer that you saw or an idol that really inspired you to go down that path, or what was it? I'm interested to hear if there was any particular impetus for that.
The Australian Ballet used to tour to Brisbane most years. So as a child, I would watch them when they came to the theatre here and I would see their performances. I also guested, extraed as a child, it's called, in their performances. So being able to be backstage with the dancers and then on stage with the dancers, this is as a 7, 8, 9-year-old in a very tiny role in a ballet, but the theatre experience and being around professional dancers who are dedicated to what they do was incredibly inspiring as a young kid. And it gave me the vision too that this was a job, this was a career, this was something you can do when you grow up. So I think there wasn't particular dances so much, rather just the experience of what being a professional dancer looked like through a child's eyes, and being able to be on stage every day as your career was, to me, just seemed very natural, and I was thrilled that there was a way you could do that as a grown-up.
That's so interesting, and it makes me think, again, being in a city like Brisbane where you've got access to those ballets, or even if I guess they're touring to rural areas, makes it more real, and then you've got that guest opportunity. Because I think about it from being in smaller towns as well, because we had ballet, lots of ballerinas where I'm from. It's life in small towns, like you live and breathe it. But yeah, I guess if you're in a bigger city where you can go and guest and those sorts of things, that would be particularly inspiring.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more around your ballet career. So you've gone from being a young dancer to becoming professional. What does that look like? How many days a week do you dance? How many hours? Can you paint a picture? And is it a bit like Black Swan and Centre Stage, or is that completely off?
Okay. This is always a really good question to ask. Those movies often come up. I'd like to say it's a lot more like Centre Stage than Black Swan, although there were elements of Black Swan that I could see where they were going with, but ultimately it was a thriller movie. It's competitive because people really care about what they do. It is not quite to that extent. Again, I think it goes back to, it is a very privileged, unique, special vocation almost. And I think it grabs the attention and the energy of young people who naturally have an inclination to be really dedicated and driven, conscientious, and take that sort of responsibility of the art form from quite a young age. I think that natural progression sort of happens for most people around 10, 11, 12. For me, it was a bit later. I think when I was dancing, there was much less focus on full-time training earlier on. So I was able to finish grade 10 at school with full normal school before I moved to the Australian Ballet School in Melbourne when I was 16, which was the start of my full-time training, which you balance alongside school. But that's when it really, really steps up, and it's the best in the country that go to Melbourne, and you've gone from your local schools being the big fish, and then you go to the Australian Ballet School and you're the little fish in a big pond. But you're surrounded by the best talent and pushed and encouraged by the best talent in the country. So that is 6 days a week, and you begin in that full-time setting. You're dancing all day long with school at the end of the day. The Australian Ballet Company is in the same building as the Australian Ballet School. They're down the corridor, so you're always at the windows looking at the company perform, rehearse, get ready for their performances. So you can see where you want to be. It's right there, and there's a tangible peering into the windows, just wanting to be on the other side, which is really inspiring. But it is a very competitive in a competitive world, and you're facing that at often quite a young age. We're talking about teenagers here, and as a mum now, I can see these are young people still with a lot of maturing that happens quite quickly in terms of handling certain settings. Having said that, the competition drives you to be the best you can be, and my friendships that I've developed from that time as a teenager are still people I have deep, meaningful friendships with today, because we were bonded over what we were experiencing together. So it's less Black Swan in that respect, it's actually much more cohesive, and they're really deep friendships you have with those people because it's a very unique thing you're doing together. So for me, dancing has always had, obviously, I've loved the dancing aspect, but fortunately for me, there's always been, they are my people. They are my tribe. They're my social group. They're my friendships as well at the same time.
But very interesting. I imagine 6 days a week dancing for a young person is a lot, and just like a sports team
Mm,
that becomes really close, I imagine it's similar for ballet, which is
mm.
another or type of athletic endeavor. So I can imagine you'd be very bonded, especially as you go through the physical and probably emotional roller coaster of executing and, you gotta get to the next level and all of that. Would that be on the mark there?
Yes, yes. There's definitely the physicality of dancing, and it is an athletic pursuit. It's tricky. I think there's sometimes a um, misunderstanding with the language used around ballet in terms of it is like a sport and it is incredibly athletic. Some ballet people in the ballet world obviously take it very seriously. It is an art and it's an art form. But I think personally it is a great thing to appreciate that it is like being a professional athlete in terms of um, the demands physically and emotionally, the journey you go on and that you're sharing with your colleagues, your friends, but you hold each other up at those times that are hard. And I think the imprint of that on young people as teenagers, growing into young adults, they're experiences that perhaps other people their age aren't having in those same settings. So it is a unique journey, but the emotional bonds you form are there for life.
Yeah, I bet it creates a lot of resilience and strength in that as well,
Mm.
having to perform and get up there and you're responsible for yourself. I'd
Mm.
also love to hear, I guess, Dana, about the travel. So you became a professional ballerina, and I know that you've done quite a lot of travel in this job. Could you paint for the audience what that looks like? What sort of countries you went to? Is it glamorous? Is it fun? Is it all hard work?
I think it's all of the it is a profession. We very fortunately in our company, the Australian Ballet, we have been lucky enough to travel a lot. It is a national touring company. It's the national company. So we tour Australia. We spend each year you would spend 2 big seasons in Sydney. The company's based in Melbourne. Um, you would spend 2 months at a time, twice a year in Sydney. So you sort of relocate, I guess, for 2 months, twice a year. Then there was usually international tours most years. So my first tour was my first year in the company. We went to the UK, to Wales and to London. And then across those 19 years, we've been to Paris, Manchester, London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York several times, also Japan, China, New Zealand. So yes, quite extensively, which is a big plus of the job, and young people getting to go and do what you love overseas is really important as an artist because it pushes you to be your best version. There is a lot of pressure and which you put on yourself mostly. And then looking after yourself physically in those on those tours is actually really tricky. Obviously, sightseeing in New York is a wonderful thing to do, but when you've got 6 shows of Swan Lake to do, 4 acts a night, you have to look after yourself. So if you walk too much and your feet and your legs get tight and all the muscles are tight, you can't dance properly. So it's definitely a fine balance and something you learn across your career. And I think as younger dancers, that's part of the journey. And you look at the more experienced dancers who know how to manage the travel and the jet lag and the hydration. And you can obviously have a wonderful time enjoying where you are, but you are also representing your company and your country at the highest level in these big centers of ballet and dance and you want to do a really good job. So there are glamorous parties and there's lots of those lovely things, but the backbone and underneath it all is a lot of hard work and a lot of that continuation of looking after yourself and learning how to look after yourself so you can be the best you can be on stage. And I definitely was able, across those years, I learnt my little tricks and ways to be able to balance that.
Oh, and did you say 4 times a night you're performing Swan Lake? Is that right?
Swan Lake is a 4-act ballet, so there's 4 different sections.
Okay.
And for the female dancers, that's a big show, and usually you are dancing 4 acts a night, so a good 2.5 hours of ballet each night. And then usually there is another ballet or another program you're rehearsing in the day, which then you are performing, next week. Or in Sydney, when we were there for 2 months at a time, you do 20, 21, 22, 23 shows of each season, and you do 2 seasons, plus rehearsing in the daytime for your next season, and you've got your training class every morning, all of your rehab, conditioning, Pilates, all of the things, fitting and physio. I mean, this all changed a lot when I became a mum. What I was able to fit in and what I was able to manage. But managing your body is a huge part of the journey as a ballerina.
Imagine, especially so young. I mean, I assume being a ballerina and having people around that know how to manage their body for such physical exertion so regularly, you learn a lot. But I took forever to work out how to manage my body. So I that learning and discipline and how do you, well, you said hydrate and then jet lag and yeah, are there a lot of injuries?
Yes, it's a physical art form, and we do a lot of preventative work now, and the Australian Ballet's artistic health team is one of, if not the best and most extensive and most up to date in the world. So everyone looks to the Australian Ballet for the artistic health advice. And I think that's because they have developed such a broad spectrum of care. And also it's the education of the dancers as you come in. So as a 17, 18-year-old joining the company, you begin then very much learning about preventative care. You have to do all your exercises. You find out your weaknesses. It's not about them being weak or turning them into strengths. They're just things you need to keep on check. Nutrition's really important, and that's a different journey for everyone as well, depending on several circumstances. But the same goal in that you want to be on for every show you can be. And that is the best part of the job. And that's how I always saw it too. If you get to be on stage every night, then that's the best part, because especially now, once I've retired, you don't remember the shows, the shows that you didn't get to do. You don't remember how many shows you got off in a season of Nutcracker, which is a really long, hard season. You're not thinking about what you did those nights when you weren't performing. What you actually take and remember and is precious to you is every single time you got to be out there. And that's looking after yourself. And you begin to see quite quickly, the Australian Ballet perform 200 shows a year on average, at least. There, you look to the older dancers, how they manage their bodies. And fortunately now, with females and males are dancing longer and longer because of this sort of preventative care and education about our bodies. Also, that's where the sports science comes in. Joining the art form, there's a lot we can learn from sports science, but we also have to understand, appreciate, and reflect that it is an art form, and we do have to be managed differently to footballers or cricketers or tennis players.
So interesting. I guess it's just another world. I mean, I did mention to you I was a dancer. I laugh because it's such a long time ago and, a childhood dancer. But it's interesting hearing about you articulate what's involved and that it's a world-leading business, well, providing information for the rest of the world on how to look after your body and that balance. I love hearing that. I wish I could talk about that another time. So now I've got to mention as well, you are highly awarded and accomplished. I've got here the Telstra Ballet Dancer People's Choice Award, the Graham Murphy Award for Excellence, and then is it right that you also played Ballerina in that movie Mal's Last Dancer?
Yes. So the quarter ballet, so the group of swans were in the Mal's Last Dancer movie. There are a couple of leading dancers who had much more featured roles, but we were in 18, which was, a great experience. Another example of there's so many different experiences that come to you when you're in the profession. And I myself am not great on screen, and I'm very much built for the stage, which is a bigger projection. The screen is not for me, but this was, again, in context of the ballet, we were the flock of swans. Yes.
Oh, see, I've watched it. I'll have to
Yeah.
watch it again or something. Now, what is your biggest career highlight? If we talk about, I guess, all these awards, the travel, was there one particular moment? I know you obviously were promoted to different levels, but is there something that stands out that would be a massive highlight in your professional career?
Uh, I mean, there's so many highlights. Yeah, especially in this position now, since I retired 2 years ago. The last 2 years have been a really reflective sort of process, to look back across what was 19 years. I danced so many beautiful roles and obviously performing all across the world, as well. Principal roles that I've always wanted to do and principal roles that I never thought I'd get to do, like Giselle. I performed Giselle after the birth of my son, Jasper. That was the first thing I danced back after him, which was very, very special. And again, similar after I had my twin girls, the performances I did after that were very special, I guess, because it's such a transformation. So to get back on the stage felt like the biggest triumph, and they were very different pregnancies and very different journeys. But I guess that gives you the perspective, though, about how wonderful this opportunity is to be able to be on stage. So they're very heightened times of emotion and feelings of fulfillment and enjoyment. So the shows after my children were born, my first shows back, both are like in my mind, I could remember every second. I finished my career actually in London at the Royal Opera House at Covent Garden, where the company hadn't performed there in over 30 years and I had never performed there. So we performed George Balanchine's Jules, which is one of my favourite productions. So I was able to finish my career there on that stage, which was incredible. And, I read a book to my girls now that I had when I was little. And at the end of the story, this little girl gets to be on the Royal Opera House stage, and I can point to it and say that's where Mummy was. So it's a really nice arc to sort of see that. And I think the biggest journey across your career, I'm going to talk about the overarching highlight though, is I grew to know myself through dance in a way I never knew was possible, but growing to know the artist I could be and to have the experience to express that on stage by the end of my career, very naturally, very openly and spontaneously, was the greatest gift.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I love hearing that, I guess, appreciation for your body and performing after having your children. And we will get into that in some more detail shortly. So thank you for sharing that, Dana. So let's go into becoming a mother. So it was 2015 when Jasper was born. And I guess we're going to talk about this with your twins as well. So feel free if you want to blend it together. But how is it to dance pregnant, and how far along were you dancing pregnant? I'm just really, I guess, impressed.
Well, it's different for everyone, and I'll preface that by saying every pregnancy is different. Every situation's different. So I always like to share that because it's amazing what I was able to do in certain settings, but equally the pregnancies itself were different. So Jasper, I was 7.5 weeks pregnant with him, and I was 29, so quite young, I guess, at the time. And I sprained my ankle in rehearsal because I was, I think, worried, and I think holding on. Being pregnant in a ballet company is very exposing. You're trying not to tell anyone. You don't want anyone to know. Or in my case, I didn't. I wanted to just get through the first trimester. It's all very new. And you're in a leotard and your body changes, not massively, but it changes enough for you to feel different. And you think people will notice. So it's a very tricky situation to sort of be pregnant in until everyone knows. And I think in my first pregnancy with Jasper, I felt that and I took that on. And not surprisingly, I sprained my ankle, which was my only injuries really in my career were several ankle sprains, which happened at particular emotional times where I felt unstable emotionally in different ways. So that showed up. And then I didn't have to perform with him pregnant, which suited me just fine. Yeah. With the twins, 5 years later, it was a bit different. And I was incredibly sick with them being twins. I was incredibly tired and really, really finding it hard to not feel awful. Basically, dancing helped me sort of stay a little bit on the straight and narrow. It distracted me enough. I felt awful if I wasn't dancing. I felt incredibly sick. I could only eat like chips and have sips of Coke. And that was basically it for the trimester, which is not the best diet to feel a ballet dancer. Obviously, that was all I could manage, but it distracted me enough and the physical exercise I think helped. So I danced with them until I was about 12 weeks pregnant. I performed on stage with the twins at that point in just a white leotard. So that's like basically like swimmers. Of all things you want to be in when you're pregnant with twins on stage in front of thousands of people, I would probably not choose that, but that's always what happens if you're pregnant in the ballet. You'll have the smallest costume to wear. But that's when also COVID happened and it shut down everything, obviously, but it shut down our performances. So yeah, the beginnings of both pregnancies obviously were very different.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm interested if you can maybe explain as well. So in such a physical industry where you've got to be fit and strong and there's, look, historically there's talk of body shapes. I'm not sure what it is like now, but how was that received? Were you able to eventually tell people, and are they supportive of women? I guess given that, we are, if you're in a, well, if you're a female and you decide your family wants to have children, you are the one that creates the child. So interested to hear more about what that's like.
Yeah, so the Australian Ballet is very supportive. So I've had very favourable supportive experiences. Now I can't talk for everyone, and I do believe that's not the case everywhere in the world with ballet, but there's a long way to go, and I hope everyone else catches up. The Australian Ballet has sort of had a footprint of maternity leave and looking after the dancers when they're pregnant, that they introduced a maternity leave program, but also a safe duties program. So the dancers, when they're ready to stop performing on stage, once they've told people they're pregnant, they move into safe duties within the organisation. So you get to explore other possibilities. I worked on reception when I was pregnant with Jasper, which I really loved because you get to meet different people and on the phones to people. I've worked in philanthropy. I helped out in communications for a bit. Some dancers work in company management. Some shadow the health team, the artistic health team, if they might be studying health at uni in some aspects. So then they sort of can use their study to then gain work experience, I guess. So it's a very positive, enriching experience. And for an arts company, as the dancers who are on the stage working really hard in that capacity, to be able to step back and see the organisation from a whole across a different perspective is so healthy and helpful and so good for you to see, especially when you then go back into the dancer and on the stage. You know how much is working behind you to get you up to the stage. So it's a very enriching experience, and it's very much depending how much exercise you do in terms of daily class. You can take class as long as you like. You've obviously got access to physio and Pilates and keeping your body strong. But I think the narrative around pregnancy, certainly in my experience, was only ever a very positive one. And I had really positive role models before I chose to start a family. And it seemed possible because they did it, and that was modeled for me. It's not without its challenges. That's for sure. Yeah, because it's a high demand career. It involves a lot of you and your time and your energy, which often is at odds with that feeling of what you want to be as a mum. But it is possible, and there are people to help you. And every single dancer who comes back after having a baby is exponentially better in terms of how they're dancing, their artistry, what they can give to the stage is exponentially, like, out of this world better.
Okay.
So it serves the company too.
Yeah, well, there's a whole lot of studies. So I come from the corporate world, and I worked at a global company that was all about best research. And a lot of the time they'd be talking about retention programs for women. Why do we not have enough women? Purely based on a business line cost perspective, right? Because it costs to lose people and then have to retrain. So I imagine that rotation through the company, which again is quite common in a lot of industries, is good because then you become more rounded, more valuable employee. And then also, I mean, keeping resources that you've spent so much time investing in instead of having that turnover is really good because it's a costing. I know that from HR people as well. So that is fantastic. And I hope for anyone listening that's a dancer in another country that doesn't do this, I hope your ears are pricked up and you go and have a very good chat with your team about how they should connect with the Australian Ballet. So kudos to the Australian Ballet. I'm really glad to, because that's pretty much sounds like it's aligned with best practice across a bunch of industries. So look, we've jumped ahead a bit, but I'm interested, I guess, to hear about how you fell pregnant. Again, given we've got a big audience of people that have multiples. So 2019, you performed the Australian Ballet collaboration with the Wiggles, which for anyone who doesn't know is a children's entertainment troupe. I don't know what they would call themselves these days. And you did something called the Big Ballet Day and Party Time, for anyone with kids who's seen it. And you met the Purple Wiggle, who is Lachy Gillespie. So Dana, I wanted to just ask you, are you just a huge fan of the colour purple?
There is a lot of purple in our lives. Yes. Lachy is the Purple Wiggle, or he's one of the Purple Wiggles.
Oh, right.
There's 2 of each colour now.
Okay.
So the Wiggles have, there are 8 Wiggles, so there are 2 of each. So he's one of the purples. Yeah, there is a lot of purple in our life. Purple is definitely our family colour. Yeah, so the Australian Ballet was asked to join the Wiggles on a DVD at the time, a release called Big Ballet Day. So about 8 of our dancers were sort of picked. Most of them were parents with little kids. So I was lucky enough to be one of those to be picked to join in. And we filmed 3 days on set there for that. And that's how I met Lachy. And that was the start of our journey.
I wanted to ask, so did you know you had twins in your family? Because your girls are fraternal, which is genetic. Did you know at all that it was a possibility, or was it just a complete surprise?
No, we had know of no twins in our family. on either side in any way. We have fraternal twin girls, so we found out at the 7-week scan. We went in. I've already got my son Jasper from a previous marriage. He was 5 at the time. We went into the obstetrician. He said, "Oh, do you want any more kids?" And we said, "Oh, no, just this one. We've got Jasper already." Lochy's the most wonderful stepdad to Jasper, so we were happy to just add one to the family. And then, of course, there was straight over on the little ultrasound. It took about 0.3 seconds for me to see there was 2 little jelly beans there. And Lochy has never seen a scan before, so he didn't even know what he was looking at, except that I'd squealed. And the doctor just smiled, and I said, "Oh my gosh, there's 2, isn't there?" And he said, "Yes." So Lochy cried with happiness. And yeah, he's always thought he would have twins, so he just had a sneaky suspicion anyway. And then we sat down and started talking about twins. But yes, we don't know any in our family. By this point, I was 35, and I'd had some sort of information that I was getting towards the end of my reproductive career. But just that as you're getting older, that things start to change. And being a ballet dancer is tricky because your best years are probably between 30 and 40. Artistically, that's where you are coming into your own. It's where you're much more confident and capable in your abilities. Younger dancers have lots of skills, but it takes time and experience to learn the craft of the art form. And that really comes into fruition between your 30 and your 40 sort of period for males and females. That's where you're most exciting and most true and most honest on stage. It's also when your biological clock is ticking and you're thinking about family life and then thinking about touring half the year with a family and how that might work. Who's going to look after your baby? And then coming back to dance, what's that going to look like? If you want several children, how are we going to space them? How are we going to fit it all in the prime of your career? Knowing that your career will also probably naturally come to a finish if you're lucky around 40, which is later than what it used to be. Dancers are dancing much longer now, but for a female, if you get to 40, that's incredible. Some people can go past, obviously. When I retired, physically, I could have done more, but logistically, family-wise, I was ready for a change. But it's a very short window, really, if you're looking at 10 years sort of window, fitting all of that in, plus retiring and a career transition, what that transition looks like. So there's no right or wrong, obviously, but they have to be really quite considered steps, I guess. And we were ready to add to our family, and then we were blessed with 2. And COVID actually hit at the same sort of time. So it was a very unusual time. I was pregnant with the twins, delivered the twins, and then I think I was back on stage with them maybe 15 months after I had them, and I hadn't missed a show because COVID had shut down all the performances in that time. So it was quite bizarre. People said we've obviously planned this so very well that that I managed to fit it into that COVID time, but that's not true at all, of course. That all just was coincidence.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, not many people plan twins, although I do have some friends that say they want to have twins on purpose. That's another story.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, interesting. Okay, good luck. Anyway, so I think, Dana, you've mentioned some really relatable things there. So women, we do have a biological clock, and whether you're performing in something such as ballet or a sport or in a professional career as well, you've got X amount of time to fit in if you want the children, the time for a relationship, and also your professional endeavors. And I think it's tricky, right? When do you do it? There is never a good time, which is so cliche. It is true. And how do you do that? And then especially when you've got multiples. So I think a lot of people will relate to that because that is a decision that people are always navigating. Will it impact your career? Can you wait later? Can you not? How's your biology going? All those checks. So I think it's really interesting call out. So you talked about your performance with the twins. You had your final performance just before you went on mat leave, or was it at 12 weeks? I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding. Was it at 12 weeks?
With
You get to do
with the twins?
that?
Yes. So the last performance with the twins in my tummy was at 12 weeks or just before. It was also the last performances before COVID shut everything down. So I had planned that would be my last performance. And then in the end, it was everyone's last performance for a long time. And then my return performance back after the twins was the company's first shows back in Melbourne in the theatre since COVID had started. So it wasn't unusual.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of good that, well, I don't know, maybe good that you didn't need to dance pregnant with twins, because I was just, in my head, I was just making the connection as to how pregnant you were when you were dancing with twins, but 12 weeks is probably slightly easier to dance as opposed to having a very large twin stomach.
Yeah. Yeah. It is different though. Your oxygen, obviously, as your sort of blood oxygen levels change, you do get puffed. I mean, most pregnant women would say this. You often feel like you get more breathy or more puffed quicker, especially earlier on in that, just very busy time building two babies, two placentas. So it is aerobically harder, even though you might not have a big twin tummy yet. But aerobically, it is much harder because you're running out of air quicker. And then obviously by the end of the pregnancy, you can't breathe because there's no space. But yes, it was a great, like I said, it was hard outside of dancing. If I was dancing and if I was on stage dancing, I didn't feel as nauseous as what I did when I was just sitting in the rehearsal studio, just like wanting to just like curl up in a ball.
Yeah, I bet. Well, my doctor had actually told me that thing about the breathing. They said that you get normally with one baby, it's 50% extra blood for the heart to pump around. And then with
Yes.
twins, you get more. And then there's obviously all the other changes and the hormones coming together. So I imagine for a lot of people, again, I won't say all because I have no idea how commonplace it is, but I imagine, there would be some restrictions there. So
Yeah.
let's go through to the delivery. Dana, you've called this your best performance. So I love hearing that. It's such a beautiful way to describe it. How many weeks were the twins born? What did they weigh? Could you talk us through the start there and maybe as to why you've called it your best performance? I think it'd be nice to explain that to the audience.
Okay. So the twins were born at 36.5. So I was very worried about premature delivery the whole pregnancy. Being twins and slightly higher risk, that was compared to being pregnant with a singleton and perhaps being my first time with Jasper, I didn't worry about that so much. But with the twins, that was a daily worry. It was also compounded to being COVID. We were in Melbourne, which was a very intense time of lockdown nonstop, especially Jasper, who was already 5. So our life was very different. Also, Lachy works in Sydney, Wiggles produce and in Sydney. So he was travelling back and forth along the Hume Highway, and then the border was closed. So we actually had to make a decision for him to get to Melbourne, and he had to stay there, and he sort of worked from there remotely. This was in the middle of my pregnancy. And then it got so bad in Melbourne, and there was a lot of, it was very stressful, and I had lots of scans being twins, and there were some concerns at the time as well. So I'd be going in for scans 2-3 times a week by myself. With everyone's in masks, and obviously Jasper had to be looked after. There was lots of stress. And then at the time, the hospital rules were always changing too about partners being in and partners not being allowed. And then if there were potential complications with the birth or the babies after birth, and if they'd need obviously any extra care in NICU or any extra things beyond that, which is something we were looking at potentially, it was really stressful and a massive worry. So we actually, both of us are from Brisbane and our families are here. So we applied for a medical exemption, which was approved, fortunately, very fortunately, because we were looking at both babies potentially needing extra surgery after birth, potentially one, not the other, with an older child at home in terms of infection control. And it was just incredibly stressful knowing how it would play out. So we drove up to Brisbane. We did hotel quarantine for 14 days, as it was at the time. We left our obstetrician who we'd been with, obviously. I had to leave Jasper behind in Melbourne with his dad, so I didn't see him for 3 months because of this, which was awful. And it was a great cost to all of us in that respect. It was emotionally really difficult, sort of choosing to go somewhere to hopefully have our babies in sort of a safer not a safer way, but a way that felt supported for us and that we would have support. But it meant, he was happy and healthy and fine with his dad, but I knew I wouldn't see him for 3 months because of the border closures. So after hotel quarantine, we actually met our obstetrician in Brisbane over Zoom in hotel quarantine. I think I was 34, 35 weeks pregnant. We got out of hotel quarantine the following week or 10 days later, we were at the hospital with the obstetrician having the babies. So I mention all of that because there was a massive backstory behind the girls actually being born. So it felt like a massive triumph to actually be there on the day, and it actually all went well, I guess. And I had a great obstetrician. He was obviously we met him very late in the piece, but was recommended by my sister, and he was incredible. And we had beautiful midwives. We had an incredible team. As you know, with twins, you have 2 of everyone, a big team at the back, also thinking they may have to be rushed off somewhere. So it was a big day, but they were born and at 2.2 kilos each, and everything was good. Their scores were good, and they seemed good, which was a just massive relief, which anyone will know after you've had your baby is just what you've been holding on to for 9 months, that they're okay. But you can actually say, oh my gosh, they're actually okay. But yeah, I was really lucky or just fortunate that I was able to have a natural delivery with the twins, which isn't as common. I say that though, it was probably a preference to have a go at that, but I was very much happy to be in the capable hands of all the professionals, and I trusted that. I trusted my doctor. I trusted everyone to make those decisions that were right for me and the babies at the time. There was no plan. I know we all feel different about certain things we can control or not. We had been through quite a full-on experience already in the pregnancy, and I was really happy to just have healthy babies and for me to also be okay. And very fortunately, that ended up being a really beautiful birth in that I was able to deliver them both naturally. They're 16 minutes apart. Wow. And it did help. I think that I'd already had a natural delivery with my son, and the babies were presenting in the right way. I really, really, if possible, really didn't want one to be born naturally and then one by a C-section, which is always the risk. So I was really hoping that was going to happen. It was just a really beautiful day, actually. I had a fantastic epidural, which my doctor said the anaesthetist he had for me was the best, and she'd give me the best epidural. And I was induced. There was lots of elements that were controlled, so it wasn't, but that's what made me feel settled and confident that all things were being able to be looked after. So I went in the morning, I was induced, and the anaesthetist arrived for the epidural. I knew I'd have that pretty much early on. I wasn't going to wait until it got too bad. I wanted to be ready in case we had to rush off to surgery. And then it was only, I think, 3-4 hours later, I was ready to push, and they sort of said, "Oh, I don't know if really not yet, maybe not yet." And I said, I think I am. I couldn't feel any pain. I could feel pressure, but no pain, which was amazing. How amazing that they can do that for you. And I felt settled and I was calm. So, and then I was able to, Lulu came out first, and I got to hold her, and she was all good. I tried, by then Lottie had floated up to the top a little bit, which can happen, and you just wait. Her heart rate was okay, so you just sort of wait for them to find their way back down again. And then she was ready, so I tried holding Lulu as I was pushing Lottie out, but I actually was laughing. It seemed a bit silly to try and hold a baby and trying to get the other. So I said, would you mind holding her so I can focus on this?
I think someone picked that up.
Yeah. And then Lottie was born, and she was healthy and her scores were good. And then I got to hold them both. And yeah, it was great.
That's a really inspiring story. And I say that obviously we know everyone's different. They've got a different situation,
Mm-hmm.
medical team, a different situation with what state your babies are in. But you are right, it is very common for C-sections now, and again, not without reason. I'm sure a lot of medical professionals would say, but it's great to hear about your particular story amongst the other stories where you've done a natural delivery or vaginal. I know that's a bit of a controversial word with some people. And you felt like you had the right information, a medical team that was supporting you. You were aware of what could play out, which would be potential section and vaginal, which, to be honest, on the chats and I've got a lot of multiple parent friends, people are worried about that. They are concerned about whether they have that. Again, I think majority of people would say that the health of the children is paramount, but of course it is a concern to have that, or whatever might happen. Now, I wanted to ask, were you checked by a physio? I've had the conversation with Joe and found out, mind blowing, that you can get checked as to whether it's likely to go well with doing a vaginal delivery. Were you checked by a physio, or did you just, from having Jasper, perhaps your physically your body was in the right situation, like your cervix stretch, I guess is what Joe said, because typically if it can't stretch, then having a vaginal delivery can be an issue, which is why you might need to see a physio. So hence the question.
Yes. But I wasn't aware that you can be checked beforehand. I think it obviously was a massive indication that it was possible for me because I'd already had a previous delivery. I imagine that that's something that most people who are pregnant with twins, that might help their obstetrician have that conversation with them. I think, I just think we all feel confident, calm, settled, prepared in different scenarios. And for me, not having a plan was the best thing I could do. And I knew my body had done it before, so that gave me some confidence that it would be possible. But if it wasn't possible, that was going to be just how it was. I think the birth of your children obviously informs so much less for them, probably, but much more for you as the mother. And it's the start of your journey. And I know in the cases of some really traumatic birth stories, that informs the start of their journey and ongoing as well. Having said that, just in my own personal experience, I tried to approach it that it was a day they were going to be born. If it went the way I wanted or it didn't want, parenting is for life. You have the children for a lot longer than that day. It is just a day after all. Perhaps my sort of professional experience in terms of what I did for a living, I don't think it helped being a professional dancer that I was more active in labour or anything. I know with my son, I was induced with him and I couldn't believe the pain in some ways. It wasn't like I was more capable or strong as an ox. I don't think it helps in that way. I think as a dancer, though, you have a knowledge of your body that is probably a lot more felt and intuitive about what it feels like. We're used to being aware of our pelvic floor and sort of how all our muscles work and feelings in our muscles, and obviously that sort of contracting feeling. But birth is new and it's new for everyone, and you don't know how it feels or how it goes until you're in it. So for me, it was just important to trust my team. And again, I met my team 10 days, 2 weeks over Zoom before they were born. So it wasn't even that we'd established a very long connection. I just felt immediate trust and confidence in the team that they were able to deal with any scenario. And having some ideas about what birth was, but also about my own body definitely helped. And then on the flip side, after the babies too, when I got around to it, understanding a lot more about pelvic floor and all of your abdominal muscles and pressure down through your ribs and how that compresses your pelvic floor. And Jo, actually, the physio who you're talking about, is wonderful. And I saw her in between having Jasper and the twins, actually, not at all pregnancy related, more so from a dancing perspective. And I think it was the start of another great part of my education journey in that way. And I think all women, especially all dancers, would benefit so greatly from seeing a women's health physio much earlier on, not in relation to pregnancy. Then when you're in a pregnancy or birth, post-birth, you're much more likely to feel confident, ready, able to pick up the phone and it not feel like a new thing, like this is because I'm having a problem. Or it's actually just a part of education in terms of your body. And it's just actually really helpful as a woman to know more about how everything works and how things feel. And it can improve lots of areas of your life too, absolutely separately to pregnancy.
It's really great advice. And I have to say, the more I learn about physio, and again, after having the twins and then doing my own recovery journey, there's so much value there that I never could comprehend before. So thank you for sharing, Dana. Now, Dana, I was going to go into, I guess, after having the girls and your story there, the feeding and sleep piece, was there anything really notable you want to call out of there?
Again, everyone's journey is different. I breastfed the girls till they were 7 months old exclusively, which is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was very taxing. And again, it was the particular time it was too with COVID and, there was no getting out. There was no mothers groups. There's no library. There was no out and about. There was no picnics in the park. Playgrounds were closed for my older child. It was pretty dire, and you were just isolated at home a lot. If it was in a different setting, maybe I wouldn't have done it this way, but basically I started breastfeeding and it was working and they were thriving. So I breastfed them together at the same time, always, day and night. So I was on the pillow thrown on my bed many times. So I had 2 breastfeeding pillows to get them high enough, actually, which I found better than just the one pillow.
Which ones? Because I
had the twin Z. Is that right? The twin Z, and then the other twin pillow, the firmer one.
My breast friend.
Yeah. Yes. So I put that underneath, and then I had the twin Z on top because they were too low. But it was quite a contraption but it worked. And then with towels over, and then the football hold. I found if I fed them separately, Again, twins are, it might be different with identical twins, but being fraternal twins, they are not identical. So they had different, a different suck. One took more than the other. If I fed them separately, for me, it was more time consuming. I tried feeding them on demand for 2 days, and then I didn't sleep for 48 hours at all. And then we went back to being on a schedule. And I'm really good at being in a routine and a schedule. My life has been very structured like that. But I must admit, compared to a singleton, it felt really unnatural how much you were just like tied to it always being the same, both up, both down, one slept for 10 minutes, okay, both back up again, all of that. But you tell me to be on a schedule and I will be on a schedule. So I was a slave to the schedule. But again, I look back and it was really hard. And at times I wished it didn't have to be that way. But with an older child as well, if they weren't on a schedule, I really would have had no time for him and his care, let alone my care. So it's all a compromise, and it was sort of like the best of what we could do. But by the end of my breastfeeding journey, though, they were thriving, but I was not. And I think that was a really important piece in me recovering from my postnatal depression, was beginning to wean. And they were ready enough, and they transitioned well enough to a formula they liked. And seeing visually them being fed by someone else instead of me, and the effort it takes to look after yourself as well when you're breastfeeding too, it's an amazing thing. And they were thriving. I look at photos of them and they were big, bouncing, chubby cheeks, everything. They were happy kids, but I was not thriving. And it was a really important piece to be able to say, okay, I'm not thriving and we need to do something about that. This is not just about them getting this. And they transitioned to formula. They were happy with their bottles, and I regained not just my body back, but my energy, a bit of energy back. Hormonally, your hormonal profile changes when you're breastfeeding to when you're not. And that was a really important shift that kick-started my recovery. So I think that would be just something I'd sort of mention in my own experience only, that breastfeeding is wonderful, and if it works for you, it's great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. But for me, making that change was a really big difference in how I was and how I could care for my babies and how I could get some version of balance back to feel like there was more to life than sitting on a bed feeding them like that, 8 times a day.
Yeah, it's quite relentless for anyone that doesn't have twins. That piece there, anyone that says, oh, I had kids very close together, not the same as football, double breastfeeding, and then suddenly one doesn't latch, and oh my goodness, absolutely not. So, Dani, you mentioned postnatal depression. I think it'd be great to speak about that a bit more. And for anyone listening overseas, it was a world longest lockdown in Melbourne, Australia, 235 days. So you were right in the thick of that. So I guess you mentioned a little bit there. I'd love to hear, I guess, how you started to manage out of that, some tips for the audience. I know there are a few questions from people that have just been diagnosed recently in your audience, and I'd love you to, I guess, talk a little bit more about that and what you would advise to those who are struggling or potentially might have it later.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough subject because no one wants this. Like, no one wants this to be them. And you hear about it and it's a little bit like, oh, if I think about it or like hear about it or listen to it, it'll happen to me. Like, it's contagious. Or that's how I sort of used to feel. And you just hope that it doesn't happen to you. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it is not your fault. And if you do experience postnatal depression or anxiety, it is not your fault. You did not wish it. You did not think it upon yourself. You did not bring it on through anything except, a multitude of factors. One of them is a massive hormonal shift, especially after multiples. And then there are many situational factors as well. For us, it was COVID. It was lockdown city. After we had the girls in Brisbane, we had to go back to Sydney so Lockie could go back to work. So we had to travel down with the twins when they were 4 weeks old. And that's when it started to kick in. You know, the sleep deprivation in itself for some people, but for us was huge. And again, having an older child that you are used to being able to look after and not being able to look after them, and trying to spend every second that you're not with the twins up, down with an older child who's also adjusting. Jasper flew up actually from Melbourne. We met him at the airport at the time. He was escorted by a police officer and a nurse from the plane to us. I hadn't seen him in 3 months. It was a big shift for him. It was a big shift for us. There were a lot of factors that were premeditating my postnatal depression. And I was very fortunate to have a very experienced maternal child health nurse. So someone who you go to periodically to check your babies. But from the very first meeting with her, she said, let's just, like, the babies are fine. I want to talk about you. She could see it so clearly and really got me, I guess, able to admit how I was feeling. And she sort of got me through to a service in New South Wales called Tricillian, which helps with settling, sleep and settling. She helped get me through to the Gidget Foundation to get on the list and then to be able to see a psychologist via telehealth, so over Zoom or the telephone. And it, for someone who's, you know, quite resilient, and I've built a lot of resilience through my career, it's always hard to admit that you're not doing well and that you're not coping. And also the reflection on that you're not coping or you're not feeling like yourself. There is a fundamental brain hormonal difference about that, which is not just putting a smile on your face. It is compounded by lack of sleep. It is compounded by a global pandemic and lockdowns and no one having a normal life. It's compounded by that lack of perspective when you're in your home and you don't go see other mothers with other babies, other twin groups who their babies don't sleep either. And you walk away going, hey, okay, we're all in this together. It felt like very, very isolating and not the village we all talk about in terms of raising kids and the impact of having other people around, the library to go to, for example. But it is not, I had to come to understand it was not my fault. I did not bring this upon myself. There was also no quick fix. There are options. And one of those options for me was therapy and having that weekly telehealth appointment. When I cancelled it because the day was too hard, I would notice again a drop in how I was feeling. It sort of became a bookmark in my week, even if I had to hold the girls at the same time to be able to talk to someone. I always felt better after. The breastfeeding piece again for me was a big shift, not just from a hormonal perspective. When you breastfeed, as I said, your hormonal profile is not the same as if you weren't. Also for me, it was exercise, and that's really hard to achieve always, other than, you know, walking around the house or around the park for that late nap in the day you're trying to get in. But every piece of movement and exercise helped. And for me, that was when Lockie said to, especially as I was not going to be breastfeeding and needed to be with them all the time, was to have the space to go dance again. And there were several layers to that, which was getting out of the bubble at home, which felt scary and foreign. I hadn't even driven the car because you didn't need to in COVID. You couldn't go anywhere. Going back to my workplace was a comfort. I'd been there so long, but the director had changed, so the boss had changed, and I knew him but didn't know him very well. There was discomfort in that it had moved on without me, and also I had transformed, but no one could see that. But it was a safe space to go and start from like baby steps of just thinking about me for a second. And I just think with twins, with any kid, but with twins, because of how relentless those early years are, it's really hard to choose yourself in any of those moments. And again, like I said with Jasper, and he was homeschooling, he'd just started school, and fortunately it was only prep, but he still had a school experience to have, and trying to manage that as well. I'm not just going to choose, I'm just going to go for a walk, or I'm just going to look after myself. Self-care is pretty luxurious word in that sort of world. So dancing actually gave me that. It was like I allowed myself to do that, to be away from the kids, away from the babies, because I went to work, even though it wasn't work to start with. It was just sort of finding myself again. But yeah, my main advice is there is help there is support there, and it is hard to access that help if you can't admit it, that you're not feeling great. And you, just because your motherhood experience starts this way does not mean it will continue in that way, and it won't last forever. But sort of admitting and being able to have that conversation with your partner, your family, and just saying, you know what, I really am not enjoying this. That does not mean you don't love your kids. That does not mean that they're not attached to you. They are attached to you and always will be. You might not feel close to them. You might not feel that bond that everyone talks about. It might not be glowy. It might not be. And it will be in time, but it might not be right now. And that's okay. But you need to thrive, I guess, or get closer to thriving instead of just us focusing on the babies thriving. And once I could sort of turn that around myself, which was through support and help, and not being as hard on myself, which took practice, and being a perfectionist, and being in ballet, you're pursuing excellence. So being a mother and having the mindset of pursuing this excellence does not really correlate. Finding that space of like good enough and finding the language of what that is, finding the triggers of what sets that off, and somehow finding, with help, with a therapist, with support, to be able to find that place of compassion for yourself, that this is hard. It's okay to say it's hard. So to say, okay to say, I just wish I could sleep more. There's going to be concessions. The house will be a mess. All of the things, but just trying to allow yourself that sort of compassion and build on those steps to get better, and you will get better. And for some women, medication is a great option. And for me, I didn't go there, but that was an option on my, availabilities of options. But there is help out there, and there's obviously a stigma, and there's a shame that mothers shouldn't feel this way. But a lot of mothers do actually. And I think if we're actually honest, and I like to think the only things I like to put into this space is honesty. I don't try to be negative, but I do think having discussions about honest experiences is important. If you actually look at having kids beyond the baby years, there's hard times with 10-year-olds. There's hard times with teenagers. Why do we not expect or acknowledge or just accept there's going to be hard times with babies where we don't like it or we don't feel like ourselves then too? You just might not have had any other experiences with teenagers yet because you're not there yet. So that's what I would have to offer.
That's really good. And thank you for being so honest and so generous with sharing that information, because it is common. And I know this now from speaking to other friends. I have another friend that breastfed mostly exclusively with her twins and had some challenges. And then the mum of quadruplets, Taylor, who I interviewed recently, she had it. She called Panda, Panda.
Yes.
Those wondering, I'm actually having them on in a little while as well. But there are a lot of, I guess, support. So I think I'd summarize there. So I think going into having any pregnancy, whether it's multiples or not, because not all listeners are going to be potentially having multiple babies, being aware that it's possible and knowing, again, that pressure off I think you said really well that it's not your fault. There's hormonal, and there's also that biological drive that, mothers care for the children, etc. That kind of energy happens as well. So knowing to get support. So if you've got in your country the support systems where the nurses or midwives come around and do checks, they're really well educated. In Australia, they rate you. I remember them telling me I was going to get rated and feeling like, oh my God, it's like school. I didn't have it, luckily, but that's another story. But knowing that there's support there, online therapists is a great call out, especially if you're a parent and you can't get to them. So people, please note that down if you know people that are having challenges or if you're in the midst of it. And then finding that time for yourself, because I think you are right. It's very hard, especially when you've got a new baby or an older kid to look after or multiple babies. It is so hard to not prioritize them, especially that first year. And so knowing to, like, even little things, if you can do that, find avenues, because I think a lot of us are not in that historical cave community we used to be in, which is you've got aunties and uncles and sisters, everyone helped with the babies back in the day, and now you can have part of that or not have that as much as they used to. So I think lots of really good insights there, Dana, so thanks for sharing. So I'm going to work on wrapping us up, but I want to just talk about that rebuilding. So you went back and you did ballet again. So I think it was postpartum, about 7 months, you started having discussions. 12 months after, you were back on the stage at 35 years old after 2 pregnancies, which is that, have I got that data right?
Something like that. Something like that.
That's what my research says, and they seem like they're good sources. So that metamorphosis of going back to it, you found, you looked after that piece of yourself which need nurturing. So I've got that as a and then eventually you've retired. So do you want to just talk about that final performance going into retirement, and then the metamorphosis as to where to next, or where you're at now as well?
Yeah, so I danced, I think the girls were 15 months about then when I did my first show back after having them. And I actually didn't expect to dance again after having the twins, just given the circumstances of twins traveling. I knew the job, which is a job, but it never felt like that. My career was demanding, and it demanded travel. It demanded lots of movement for the family. My son was in school. So I didn't actually expect to dance again. I thought I would just not come back after the twins. In the end, life happened differently, and I'm so grateful that Lockie encouraged me to start again for myself initially, and then it was without a goal actually at first, because normally there's a performance or a season, a ballet you're getting ready for, but I wasn't actually. And then a performance came up to be a part of a season, and it was a ballet I loved, and then I actually ended up doing the principal role in it, one of the principal roles in Serenade, last minute actually, and that was my first show back, and that was that feeling of triumph that only people close to me knew how far I'd come since having the girls, and to reclaim that part of myself and reclaim that joy, and I think reclaim the part of me that wasn't about how good you are at being a mum, or how well your babies sleep, or how they're fed, or all the things. It was the part of me that was separate to that it was really nice to celebrate her as well. I danced with the Australian Ballet for almost a further 2 years after that, and it was the best time of my career. So I'm so grateful I went back. I think after you've had these really challenging experiences, the silver linings, the blessings, which you don't see at the time when you're in the depths of the depression, you can't see that. But the perspective you gain from those really challenging times is the full appreciation of when things are really good and when things feel really good, and for how hard you had to actually work to get back to that. Not just physically. People ask me about the physical aspect of returning to professional ballet, and that to me was just something that happened. I know it was hard work, but it It almost like I wasn't aware of that. For me, it was the emotional and mental journey of being able to be myself again, and then managing the touring load, managing touring to Sydney for 2 months at a time, and juggling Jasper away. And my husband Lockie performs with the Wiggles all over the world, so he travels all the time. We have lots of moving parts, and I got really, really good at managing it all, and it was incredible what I could do, but it was never going to be sustainable, which is why I threw everything at it I could for 2 years and took everything I possibly can and just loved every second. I did lots of new ballets. The girls were growing, they were healthy, they had a beautiful nanny who looked after them, and our families helped. It was a busy time, but it was a very fulfilling time. So when the time came for me to recognize in myself it was time to move on, it felt like I was ready. It was a natural progression. It was a time to celebrate what I'd achieved. And then it led to my last shows in Melbourne where my family could watch. And then my final shows in London at the Royal Opera House, which was incredibly special. I was a little girl from Brisbane who, started off doing jazz actually. And then I ended up finishing an incredible career with the national company at the Royal Opera House in London. So it was a real celebration of that. And then looking ahead to us moving back to Brisbane and having our settled sort of family life here, and having our kids grow up where we grew up. And I am the one at home all the time now. And it's sort of just as busy, actually. And the girls start school next year, so that's another transition again. But it has been a big change of pace and a massive transition from doing something I've loved, like I said, since I was 3, and now there's an absence of that. And I think because I have had some mental health challenges in the past, including that time with postnatal depression, it's given me some tools, definitely. It's given me strategies. It's given me an ability to say, you know what, I feel like, I need some help with this. And I've actually seen a really great psychologist for the past year, 18 months. And we work through a lot of these things. And some of these things are still from when the girls were born during COVID. And I'd like to think that that's all just in the past. And I think sometimes when you've had challenges, it can feel like, oh, is that still there? But actually that informed a lot of their early life and my time as a twin parent in the first few years. And then working also too, reflecting on and working on what served me in the ballet world, what served me, what worked in the ballet profession, what was rewarded even in that profession, what success looks like, how much of a perfectionist I am without actually knowing I was. And then you try to translate that to a full-time mum, the person who's here for it all, for, all the appointments and all the drop-offs and buying the birthday presents and, oh, I've got that, and managing the family and managing kids and their development, their feelings, and growing emotions, changes, what a 10-year-old's like compared to a 5-year-old. I feel like I'm so all in this now, but I'm learning a lot. I'm learning new skills, and I'm learning new ways of approaching things. That ballet, it was different. You can put lots of hard work in ballet and be really successful. You can put lots of hard work in at home. And what does success look like? What does it feel like? It's different. So it's been a big adjustment, and I'm grateful that I've had this time with them where I haven't been focused on ballet, which is a very self-focused and demanding sort of career. But it does lead to sort of what's next. And there's lots of spaces I'd like to work in. I feel like my energy or my particular set of knowledge could be valid in, and I'm just sort of looking at and exploring what that is. Dance is always going to be a part of my life in some way. And hopefully there'll be some space for that too. But yeah, it's for the first time in my life, actually, it's like a blank page. Which as a 3-year-old growing up in ballet and just always looking ahead, always looking towards that next goal, that next exam, that next ballet, that next career choice, that next role, that's not there anymore. So I'm just navigating the sort of open space now.
So exciting. I mean, such a different part of life, and I think, again, very relatable. A lot of parents end up where you are, where they're changing from whatever career, whatever they did before, to being
Mm.
carers. So really exciting for you. Question, do you
Mm.
want to share some of the ideas of what you want to do so the audience hear and maybe someone's friend of a friend, or do you want to wait and see? Up to you. You can put the energy out there, or you can
Oh.
you can you can leave that as a surprise and see what's coming.
Yeah, I honestly, I've got all these ideas that come to me, when you're like in the car or, yeah, I just think the idea of being creative again excites me. And I've lived a very creative life, and it's been in one domain, one medium, and one version of something, a very structured version as well. My day was structured every day. But it's only sort of more now I can see how much creative energy I was around, other creatives as well, and that I am actually by nature a creative person, and it's sort of looking where I can put creativity into the world. I do like writing and I would love to write a book, but I don't even, I'm still sort of working out what sort of space that's into. But again, it's also recognizing the seasons of life, and there are lots of things I could do, and I'd love to do my Pilates training, and there's certain things like that. But in terms of balancing the family and balancing the family's energy, throwing myself into a really demanding career right now is not the space I need to be in. And so the part of that is acknowledging that I've actually done that. Like I've really done that. So I don't need to be just as successful doing something else. It's sort of making peace with that. Like I've been already lucky to have been successful and so fulfilled in something I love. And I might not find something I love next. I might find something I like a lot or that I enjoy doing, but it might not be my life's passion. But I have my family as my purpose now, and my passion, and having time with them really matters. And then in a few years' time, things will shift again in terms of kids getting older, and I'm just hoping I can continue to develop my creativity somehow.
Exciting. Well, look, I am so excited, and I love how obviously so wise and so much perspective you've had from your journey, from that, little girl who started out through all the way to forming around the world, and motherhood times 2 pregnancies and 3 children. I'm excited. Definitely write a book. I think that would be great. But Dana, I think that's a really good note to end on. So thank you so much for sharing today. I've really enjoyed having you on, and I think this will be a really valuable episode for a lot of people.
Thank you so much. I've loved talking to you, and it's always lovely to hear different people's experience. So thank you.
Very welcome. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed today's episode, and it would be great if you could give us a rating so the algorithm gets us to reach more parents just like you to thrive rather than just survive.